Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, the Pakistani Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, and Chinese President Xi Jinping met on Wednesday to discuss bilateral relations, the regional situation, and other matters of mutual interest. This is the second day of Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit to China. Now, the meeting was followed by a luncheon banquet hosted by the President of China in honor of Prime Minister Khan. Accompanying Prime Minister Khan was the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, the Minister for Planning and Development and Reform, Minister of Railways, advisor on commerce. So he had a big entourage who went with him. Also, a very important mention with Prime Minister Khan was the Chief of Army Staff, DGISI, and other senior officials. Now, the conversation has pretty much focused on the Belt and Road Initiative project. Prime Minister Imran Khan emphasized also the importance and the depth of Pakistan-China friendship, especially in recent events where China has firmly stood by Pakistan in supporting Pakistan's core national interests and playing a major role in sort of advancing Pakistan's economic as well as national and security development goals. Now, to talk more about what was all discussed, we will be speaking to our correspondent now, however, to look into what are those core interests between Pakistan and China, especially regarding CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. We've got with us Mr. Hassan Daud, who is the former head of projects, the project director of CPEC, talking to us from Peshawar. Welcome to Newswire, Mr. Butt. We're starting off with this meeting. There have been two other meetings that have taken place, two other visits by Prime Minister Khan to China in the recent months. This one especially, what is the key takeaway for you in this recent meeting?
I mean, naturally, it's a follow-up of the two previous visits that you've just mentioned. But more importantly, based on the regional situation that has occurred after the Kashmir, the Indian actions in Kashmir, I would not even use a phrase for that, but what has happened in Kashmir perhaps would stand out in the discussion between the leadership of the two countries. And also besides that, the phase 2 of CPEC, how would that be taken forward? Because, as you understand, the B2B interactions between the two countries would now come into forefront as opposed to the G2G agreements and projects that were undertaken in the past 5 years. So that B2B needs careful articulation because, you would have business, private and both state-owned enterprises interacting from that side. So that would also require a push from Chinese government because while we create that enabling environment here, we also need Chinese government to actually facilitate their investors, especially big size investors who are into the export supply chain, to come and invest in Pakistan and benefit from our investment and incentive policies.
Okay. Mr. Butt, also tell us about the kind of opportunity that Prime Minister Imran Khan has been highlighting here that exists. What kind of opportunities for Pakistan does this opportunity provide in terms of investments and businesses and promotion of Pakistan's economy?
Yeah, since the time that Prime Minister Imran Khan took office, and from his first visit to China, he's been speaking about certain sectors, and that's part of his political agenda also. And clearly, his focus, his directions are towards socio-economic development. And within the framework of socio-economic development, agriculture stands out clearly. And even during this visit, I believe that he would be discussing some of possible projects that can be undertaken easily between the two countries, also after the FTA too, because there are certain tariff items of agri-based products which Pakistan can easily export to China. So this would naturally be, but in terms of industrial cooperation, I'm sure you understand that Pakistan does need to create an enabling environment where Chinese industrial relocation can take place. And for that, we need to have specific industry-specific, tailor-made incentives in our pillar industries like textile, like agriculture, mines and minerals, and now that we are speaking about tourism also in there also. You just can't, ask the investor to take all the risk and not provide them with the
right incentives. But Mr. Bhatt, also if you could highlight, would this also include modernizing the existing infrastructure, whether we're talking about roads or we're talking about railroad networks? And if so, anything has been done or completed in that regard in the first phase of CPEC?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of infrastructure projects were done and energy projects, but I just want to remain focused on the visit of the Prime Minister. And I think this time he is also speaking about Chinese support in revitalizing our steel sector, our Pakistan Steel Mill and another project within that sector, so that, our dependence on export in steel is reduced. And also ML1 project that has been delayed, I believe, because of the firming up of the scope and the cost of the project, which has been done now just recently. So now I think the discussion on the financing of this project would also take place. Again, as I've learned that during this visit, they would also talk about Bunji Dam, as it's a huge hydel project and has tremendous energy capacity. And if that takes place and China steps in, so steel, agriculture, hydel energy, and also water projects, I think this is the way to go. And with this, we also would like that Chinese SME sector could do joint ventures with Pakistan. And before going to China, there was an exercise done wherein it was the sectors and our capacity actually to undertake any joint venture exercise was done, so that when we go to China, we should be well prepared in order to present projects as opposed to sectors.
Okay. With that, let me also welcome another guest who's joining us, the former Minister Sardar Asif. Mr. Asif, thank you for taking out the time speaking to us here on Newswire. As we are discussing with our guest, Mr. Hassan Daud, but about what was discussed here between the two leaders of Pakistan and China in terms of CPEC and the projects that need to be taken forward. What I'm curious to know is your take on this visit at a time where Pakistan is pushing a narrative in the international forum for the rights of those right now facing a huge humanitarian crisis in Jammu and Kashmir. In that regard, and also in terms of the concerns that have been floated by Chinese investors regarding the progress of CPEC projects. What's your take on this?
You see, this visit of the Prime Minister has multi-dimensions. And CPEC is one of the dimensions. And I think there are differences between two countries in how to approach the CPEC projects. On the aspects of their financing or loaning and equity participation. So I think those differences will have to be ironed out.
Right.
And I understand that they have taken other projects also, which includes a north-south railway connection.
Right.
Either to reinforce the connection and turn it into a two-way connection or a separate railway connection between north and south. And maybe there are other projects that Pakistan is taking with them to China. Then there's a question of Chinese investments, and the Prime Minister has made a lot of stress on that and has had a meeting with Chinese corporate leaders. Now, the other significant thing is that he has taken army chief with him. Normally, this is not done. When a Prime Minister goes, he has his own agenda, and the military agenda is part of it. But this is to emphasize that there is likelihood to be more military cooperation between China and Pakistan. And China is now emerging as one of the largest military powers in the world, which is rubbing shoulders with the United States. So it's all the more important that Pakistan and China explore new avenues to strengthen Pakistan's defense capacity and capability. I think that's not likely to happen. Then what I had suggested, I don't know if it will reach the right ears, that China is soon to commence very high-level defense exercises in Ladakh, involving 10 Chinese divisions and Air Force. And they'll bring their latest technology there. I suggested that Pakistan should make an offer that this should be a joint exercise between Pakistan and China, because both countries share a part of Ladakh, or what was part of Ladakh.
Right.
So Gilgit used to be part of Skardu, used to be part of Ladakh once. No, it's not. And we settled that dispute with China. So this will send a very powerful signal all over the world that Pakistan and China stand together on major strategic and defense issues. So these are my thoughts which I share with you.
Right. Okay, so but very quickly, Mr. Asif, I should also ask you about this, that this conversation about Indian-occupied Jammu Kashmir that the Prime Minister Khan highlighted, the lockdown of millions of Kashmiris there that has been underway for over 2 months now. It's creating a humanitarian situation. Again, stressing the urgency that more has to be done by world leaders. Is this going to take hold in terms of the Chinese leadership then expected to visit India in the coming weeks?
You see, I'm one of those who believe that China is a world power, a permanent member of the Security Council. So China will act in a very cautious manner. When they are in India, they will have talks with their Modi and others. But not manage India while they are there, because they are guests of the Indian government. And Chinese are very sensitive about all these issues, because they are a very old, continuous narration of 5,000 years. So they have their own system of their manners and courtesies and protocols. They will not embarrass India. But in the in-house discussions, which will not go public, China will tell them that India should mend its fences with all its neighbors and lower the tensions and create an atmosphere in which tensions are reduced and the threat of war is eliminated.
Thank you so much, Mr. Asif. We had former Foreign Minister there speaking to us. Let me also now connect to our correspondent in Beijing, Mr. Patrick Falk. Tell us a little about the conversation or the topics that were discussed between Prime Minister Imran Khan and President Xi Jinping.
Well, as you might expect, it was a very cordial meeting between the two leaders. They spoke at length about the support that they've given one another and the long-standing friendship between the two countries as well. Both China and Pakistan talked about some difficulties that they'd experienced in the past, and that they'd been there for each other essentially. And Prime Minister Khan in particular noted that this was without any condition on the issue of security, which of course was in focus during this meeting, particularly because it's coming before President Xi's visit to India tomorrow to meet Prime Minister Modi of India. President Xi said that he supported Pakistan's legitimate rights to defend its sovereign territory, echoing some of the comments made by Li Keqiang yesterday during Prime Minister Khan's meeting with the Premier. He also said that he hoped that the two countries could resolve the matter, while Prime Minister Khan said that he hoped that he could get support in preventing the situation from escalating any further.
And what in terms of CPEC, the Belt Road Initiative, the projects and investment, what came up in the conversation between the two?
Well, this trip was very much about Pakistan reassuring China that CPEC was moving ahead smoothly. And President Xi did talk about that and said that he was confident in the next phase of CPEC going ahead. And this would open up more investment opportunities for the Chinese. And this was, of course, something that China was concerned about amid talk that CPEC projects had been slowing down. But Pakistan has made a big effort while here in Beijing to assure China that things are moving ahead as planned.
And tell us a little about what President Xi Jinping said, especially in terms of the kind of relationship that Pakistan and China had, and also in terms of how Pakistan was doing in terms of staying on track with these CPEC projects.
Well, both sides talked about the long-standing friendship between the two countries and the importance of that friendship in terms of maintaining stability. Prime Minister Khan spoke about the economic difficulties that Pakistan had faced and that China had been there to support it. And likewise, China made very similar comments and said that it had also experienced difficulties in the past, and Pakistan had been there for China, and that was something that the country hadn't forgotten. So, as I say, this was very much about cementing the relationship between the two countries. And previously, Foreign Minister Qureshi, on the issue of security, had said that Prime Minister Khan's visit was very much about the two sides taking each other with confidence ahead of this visit to India by President Xi, and that China would inform Pakistan or keep Pakistan informed of anything that is discussed while President Xi is meeting Prime Minister Modi in India.
Right, and just one last question, Patrick. Did Afghanistan at all come between the two when they were discussing a regional peace and stability?
Not as far as we understand. That may have been on the table, but we aren't aware of any discussion of that sort. But of course, we were expecting a bigger focus on security matters. Yesterday, Prime Minister Khan very much focused on economic ties and business relations between the two countries. And of course, there was, as I say, this focus on Kashmir ahead of the visit to India by President Xi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick, for joining us there, bringing us an update of what unfolded earlier today in Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit to Beijing. Coming back to you, Mr. Butt, one quick last question. Moving forward from here, especially considering the kind of position Pakistan is in terms of geopolitical relations and tensions with its neighbor, how does this trip affect China's visit, President Xi Jinping's visit to India tomorrow?
It would build confidence, on Pakistan's side, understanding how this visit to India would unfold. But clearly, President Xi must have set his agenda for India, and the issue of Ladakh, if not directly, would indirectly be on the table. Besides that, perhaps that invitation to join Belt and Road Initiative would also be one of the discussion points, because India has, since its inception, has been somehow keeping itself out of the Belt and Road calculus. And for us, this visit really, before the visit, I think there were certain confidence-building measures taken, like the Afghan transit trade starting from Gwadar, the policy incentives for Gwadar port approved by the cabinet and the ECC,
right,
and of course the raising of the CPEC authority. These are measures which demonstrates that Pakistan is now serious about the second phase of CPEC, and also
serious about the second phase of CPEC and moving forward with that. Thank you so much, Mr. Hassan Daud, for joining us there, the former project director of CPEC in Pakistan. We are now going to take a quick short break. When we come back, we will be bringing you the latest updates of what's unfolding in Indian occupied Kashmir. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. We'll be talking now about what is unfolding in Indian-occupied Kashmir. The latest developments include all main political parties there have boycotted the first ever local body elections that was scheduled for October 24th. India's top opposition party, the Indian National Congress, has also reversed its decision after pledging to participate in the polls last week. Now, the Congress party spokesman, Ravinder Sharma, he says that this decision was taken in the wake of hundreds of Kashmiri politicians who have been arrested by the Indian government, and he's expressed strong reservations over the political and security environment in the occupied valley. There are other political parties which are belonging to the valley that have also expressed reservations over participating. That includes the National Conference, it includes the People's Democratic Party, and so on and so forth. So not only will we be discussing the authenticity of the local body elections in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but also bring into question the major players who are refusing to participate, and also the expression of resentment, of concern that is coming by leading U.S. Democratic candidates for the U.S. presidential elections of 2020. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. Joining us today, we have with us today Dr. Ather Zia, an analyst joining us from Colorado, USA. And also from Islamabad here in Pakistan, we have former Ambassador Tariq Zamir joining us. Thank you for taking out the time, both of you. I want to start with you, Dr. Ather Zia, in hearing your reflection on not just about the authenticity of these local elections being announced at a time where the valley is being policed by over 1 million soldiers, Indian troops. And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, we have to look at this in a very historical context. India has always tried to handle Kashmir, and electoral politics, quote unquote, the electoral democracy, has been a very big tool in trying to tell the world that things are okay and Kashmiris are with us. So I think this is the next phase of what they were doing in the 60s and the 70s, and then also in the 80s. So what we see right now is a trickle-down effect. Like early on, you had these big parties that were being fielded, that were these client politicians who were being part and parcel of those elections and that electoral democracy that was basically a sham democracy. And now what we see is that they are actually trying to field people, local people. That has trickled down to the local population, to the local bodies, and to the communities, and they are getting some candidates. And what we see and what I see as happening is that they're trying to bring the strife into the local homes, into people's communities and neighborhoods, because once you feel some candidates and who will be ready to go for these block development elections, what's going to happen is that you have people who have been pitted against their own communities. So majority of the seats are still left unattended. There are no candidates there. So it remains to be seen how they're going to really pull this off. But this is the politics of democracy being played in a new phase. So that's how I see it, that there has never been democracy in Kashmir. Mm-hmm. What we see and what we have always seen in Kashmir is a politics of democracy that has been played. And this is maybe the final phase of it, that they brought it to the communities and to the people. And it's going to be devastating if they pull this off.
Mr. Tariq Zamir, to you, do you see it in the same light that this is, as Dr. Zia mentioned, in a way, a sham effort to put on a show almost, that this is democracy taking place, even if attempting to field local candidates, people from representing the local population?
These elections will be a complete farce, Ayza, if I may say that. And I'm not the only one to say this. Even the parties that will be taking part in these elections are saying this. Even those people who are watching the situation in the Indian-held Kashmir are saying this, simply because of the fact that it's the 62nd day that these people are under complete lockdown. Mm-hmm. So who are the people who will take part in these elections? And under what state of mind? Say, even if they lift this lockdown now, how will these people who will be under absolutely a changed state of mind and they would have gone through such a fear psychosis, or do you expect them to take part in these so-called elections? I don't think these are elections. This is just a farce. This is absolutely an eyewash for the world, so that they can say, look, we deleted this Article 370. Now we are having elections. This is basically aimed at, creating some kind of a smoke screen for the world.
Right. Okay. So, Dr. Ather Zia, to you, I want to quote here what Ms. Kamala Harris said, a major Democratic candidate for the 2020 U.S. presidential elections, quote, "We have to remind the Kashmiris that they are not alone in the world," end quote. When you hear these kind of statements coming in, especially after the visit of a prominent U.S. Senator, Chris Van Hollen, who attempted to visit Jammu and Kashmir and was denied access by the Indian government, how do you feel?
Well, I feel the current communication lockdown is such a small word to be used for it. But what has happened in the last 64, 65 days, the world is watching. Even if we see that there are no major repercussions on the Indian government, there is still a lot of friendship being shown to India. World powers, world bodies, world politicians in the United States, they're invoking Indian democracy. They are kind of like invoking the historical, generous, Republic of India, which has always looked towards non-violence and all of that. But Kashmiris are familiar with an India which has never been that non-violent, which has never been that kind of a benevolent power. Mm-hmm. So we see those kind of opinions coming out, but at the same time, it is building, no doubt. But at the same time, there is no major repercussion on India, and that is also one of the biggest fallouts, and that also Kashmiris are witnessing. While they are witnessing U.S. presidential candidates, some politicians and also there's a lot of solidarity amongst grassroots groups which have come out and have protested for Kashmiris. So that kind of opinion is building, and hopefully that will continue to build, and we hope that there's going to be some constructive measure coming out of it.
Right. And Mr. Tariq Zamir, this curfew, these restrictions are entering their third month. It's been over 6 days. What's also interesting here is that while we mentioned Ms. Kamala Harris, I should also mention here that two other presidential candidates have spoken. They've not minced words when it comes to Kashmir here. Bernie Sanders, he's come out and made a very strong statement. Let me just quote what he said on Saturday. The rights of the Kashmiri people must be respected. And he refers to India's August 5th action to annex Kashmir as unacceptable. Also, Elizabeth Warren has spoken about this. I mean, when we look at this situation, the 70-year-old conflict, it's always been a question by analysts that the reason nothing has been done so far by world leaders is because they don't have anything at stake. Could this possibly be changing?
You see, it's unfortunate that it's not getting the attention that it should be getting. The situation in Kashmir, Indian occupied Kashmir, it's not getting the attention that it deserves. 62 days have already passed now. It is the 62nd day. Yesterday, we saw a statement by the State Department and also by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in which they have placed sanctions against China for their what they think is bad treatment of the Uyghurs. It's unfortunate that while they can put China under censure, under sanctions, they are not willing to even condemn India. Mm-hmm. So, how we look at it is that it is they are just weighing their interests, how it suits them. When it will suit them, if it suits them, they will come up with a stronger statement. Otherwise, as knowing from my own experience and having stayed in Washington, D.C., some 2 decades ago, one should expect that there will be some congressional hearings where they will invite the people from the State Department. There will also be some, something going on in the think tanks, because, the Washington, D.C. is replete with think tanks who work on all sorts of issues on South Asia and human rights, on this. So unfortunately, we are not seeing what we should be seeing, given the magnitude of this situation.
The magnitude of the situation. Dr. Ather Zia, as frustrating as it is for not just those witnessing this firsthand, the Kashmiris, of course, but also the Pakistanis who are pushing continuously this conversation on international forums so that the attention isn't taken away from this humanitarian crisis. But the reaction we've seen, could we say what we've seen by the Indian government in the past few days in terms of lifting the travel advisory, trying to encourage tourists back, is that worth anything? Is that indicating that things are getting better?
I don't see any of those measures indicating as things are getting better on ground. They are trying to showcase, they're trying to do what they have done for the last 72 years, that is handling Kashmir, that is trying to manage the problem for the world bodies and for the world communities. This is just a camouflage, a smoke screen that they are presenting. Kashmiris are still under lockdown. They're still facing restrictions. Phones have not been open. Nothing, internet is not on. Just 2 or 3 days back, a young Kashmiri died of a snake bite because he couldn't get medicine on time. So all of those things are still happening to Kashmiris. So how is it possible they're lifting the travel advisory? Who are the tourists who are going to come? Who are the people who will have the conscience to come into Kashmir and be doing all the things that tourists do? Who are the people who are going to give them those experiences? Kashmiris right now, they are saying that there is civil disobedience going on in Kashmir, but I don't think there is civil disobedience because there's no question of obedience. There is a resistance in Kashmir, and they're showing that resistance. And even if they lift the travel advisory, even if they're trying to buy the apples from the farmers, Kashmiris are showing no interest but resistance because it has gone too far. And that's what they say, that this time it's a do or die situation. Now, Kashmiris can't come out on the street because they know they are vastly outnumbered and there are too many soldiers. So I think they are doing it a smarter, more wiser way, which is staying indoors and trying to sort of like carry on their life. There is no normalcy, but they are trying to carry on their lives. And it remains to be seen what this travel advisory is going to do and who are the people who are actually going to trickle in.
So too little, too late versus not really doing much at all. That seems to be the smokescreen that the Indian narrative continues to go forth while world leaders decide how they could pressurize India to take action. With that, we've come to the end of this part. Dr. Ather Zia and Mr. Tariq Zamir, thank you so much for taking out the time to speak with us. We will now take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. The White House has officially confirmed that high-level talks involving the Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin will begin on Thursday. Now, while these talks over the 15-month trade war between the two economic giants is highly anticipated, not just by economists, but also others who are lamenting the regressing growth of the world economy, moves by the White House and the U.S. State Department and the consequent retaliatory responses by the Chinese seem to have doomed the talks to begin with. So we'll be really talking about how these trade talks are expected to move ahead, or are they already dead in the water? Let me introduce our guests who are joining us from Washington, D.C. We are joined by Ms. Elizabeth Larus, an analyst, and we also have with us Mr. Andrew K.P. Leung, international independent China strategist, joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you, both of you, for taking out the time to speak to us here on Newswire. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Elizabeth, if we could. First of all, good morning. I believe it's very early in the day for you. But how do you see these talks moving forward? What's your take on the kind of back and forth going on, especially in terms of the blacklisting of Chinese tech companies by the U.S.?
I don't anticipate a lot of progress in these talks. Liu He, Vice Premier Liu He and a delegation have been coming over for over a year now. And the Trump administration appears to be holding quite firm in the demand that it wants from China. In particular, the Trump administration wants China to move away from its Made in China 2025 program, in where the Trump administration says that China is stealing a lot of U.S. technology, not respecting U.S. intellectual property rights, giving subsidies to its own firms. And that is disadvantageous to the United States. And so unless the United States, that is the Trump administration, sees China compromise on some of those issues, that there probably won't be great fruition coming of these trade talks. And as a matter of fact, Liu He is leaving a day early. He was supposed to stay until October 12th. Apparently, he's leaving the United States October 11th. So there's a lot of pressure on him, but it doesn't appear that there's any breakthroughs this time.
But would you say, Ms. Elizabeth, that the Vice Premier leaving early, as opposed to what was planned, could also indicate that the Chinese might not just be interested in extending these talks?
Yes, that's a possibility. Why send such a high-level delegation over, though? You know, we're talking about the vice premier. Liu He is an old hand. He's been around for a while. He is a trusted associate of Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And so he is kind of like, you know, the big guns, bringing out the big guns. And he is coming with the Minister of Commerce from China and the governor of China's central bank, as well as other officials from agriculture, industry, and technology. You know, expect that China will say, okay, we'll increase agricultural imports from the United States, as they did, you know, in September, a little earlier in the fall. They agreed to increase soybean purchases from the United States, and we see just in the last month that they booked like more than $3.5 billion of tons of soybeans. So,
which is pretty much 10% of their annual purchase. It's a big purchase they've made.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, I mean, they do want to move the ball forward. And so they're going to try, you know, various avenues because they have the pressure of the proposed increase in tariffs. President Trump had said, as of October 15th, if we don't see some compromise, that goods from China that are now tariffed at about 25% are going to go up to 30%. I think it's 30% on some like $200 billion of goods from China. So that's significant for China. As the economy, the rate of growth in the economy is slowing a bit. It's also politically a very important year, all these anniversaries that we're seeing in China. So Xi Jinping, you know, wants to see some progress. Whether he's going to get it doesn't seem likely right now.
Doesn't seem like. So let's bring you into the conversation, Mr. Andrew. I want to go back to also what we can read into how the dynamics are playing out with both delegations meeting in these highly anticipated talks. What we also understand is that this time the Vice Premier will not be carrying the title of Special Envoy. Some analysts are saying that in itself takes away the power President Xi had handed to him back in May as a negotiator on his behalf. How do you see this?
I think that the Chinese have been going on with these talks for quite some time now, and they are learning the kind of negotiating style on the other side, and they realize that both sides, of course, are feeling the hurt, but on China's side, the damage has not been as extensive as it first appeared, and also the clock seems to be ticking. Not on China's side, but on the side of the Americans, in the sense that President Trump is coming with his presidential election. And then there are lots of pressures on the president at the moment with the kind of impeachment inquiry and a lot of dynamics playing. And so the pressure is on the side of the U.S. more than on the side of the Chinese.
So you see the pressure more on the side of the U.S., but I want to talk a little more on whether Washington's move on Tuesday to blacklist these Chinese tech companies. There was a facial recognition tech company, there was artificial intelligence tech companies for their alleged involvement on what they call human rights abuses in the Chinese province Xinjiang. And then at the same time, the U.S. State Department's decision to impose visa restrictions on some Chinese officials. This coming in at this crucial juncture is when you say that the Chinese are learning the negotiating skills here of how the U.S. takes these on. Is this a typical President Trump tactic? Is it a pressure strategy they're recognizing?
I think that the Chinese are taking this in its stride. But let's face it, I mean, the human rights is not the first time that the United States is using human rights to pressure the Chinese. But as far as the technologies are concerned, especially kind of facial recognition, it of course fits into the kind of technology war. And of course, China is aware of that. Of course, the Chinese are not happy with this kind of use of the human rights as a leverage. But on the other hand, I don't think it's going to scuttle the negotiation. But the point I'm trying to get at is that whatever a deal is going to be made is only going to be only temporary, because the deep-seated conflicts between the two countries are unlikely to be resolved. For example, the U.S. feels that the rise of China is an existential threat, especially on the technology side and on the geopolitical side. So I think that all these, and of course the China presidency is unlikely to give up the Chinese model, which depends on state-owned enterprises to a large extent. So I think that these deep problems about state-owned enterprises, about technology advancement, are unlikely to be resolved in this deal, whatever it is.
All right, Mr. Andrew, KP Looping there joining us. Thank you so much. Coming back to you, Ms. Elizabeth, what Mr. Andrew was talking about here, is there a conflict in understanding that the Chinese are only looking for a short-term sort of an agreement and they want to get this over with, wait out the present administration and really want to get down to the books with the new administration? Is that the feeling in Washington also?
Not the way I interpret it, because if you look at the comments coming out from the Democratic side of the aisle, they have the same concerns about China, the same concerns about the Made in China 2025 program, China's quest for technology dominance, for its trade issues, its artificial intelligence, stealing, cyber stealing. All of that is shared on both sides of the aisles, which is rather, it's interesting that China is actually bringing Republicans and Democrats together. You have Trump agreeing with Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in the Senate. That's quite remarkable. And so I don't think it is to China's advantage to wait to, the 2020 election, hoping to get a Democrat in, and the Democrat won't come in until January of 2021. And so I don't anticipate that there would be a change in policy if there would be a change of administration.
And also, just about the blacklisting and the kind of retaliatory remarks coming in from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, Deng Shuang. He said, and I quote, "We urge the U.S. to immediately correct its mistake, withdraw the relevant decision, and stop interfering in China's internal affairs." Is this taking the U.S.-China trade war in a completely different direction?
Well, as Mr. Leung said, this is China-United States relations have gone well beyond a trade war. There's something more fundamental going on. It's a real disagreement of values, of ideology, it's a contest for supremacy. And so, if it were just about the trade war, we would have seen some, progress when China said, okay, we'll buy some more of your agricultural products and we'll, make some agreements around the margins. But it's gone well beyond that. And it is definitely a race for technological advantage. This is really at the heart of it. Okay. The leader of 5G is going to be the technological leader and will have influence throughout the world. And China and the United States both want to be that leader.
All right, Ms. Elizabeth Larus joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for taking out the time. We were talking about U.S.-China trade war as the negotiation is expected to start tomorrow, and how that goes forward. What is happening on the sidelines is in the global economy. Stocks are down as these tensions between these two economic behemoths continues to heat up. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have here on Newswire. We will be seeing you next week. Stay tuned to Indus News for the latest updates on these stories. Till next time, goodbye.